In April 2025, a lethal heatwave settled over the Indian subcontinent, arriving weeks ahead of the typical summer season. By June, thermometers in Rajasthan registered a blistering 48 degrees Celsius. The sheer thermal stress triggered intense thunderstorms, collapsed local power grids under surging AC demand, and claimed over 455 lives in a matter of weeks. Climate scientists reviewing the 2025 data observed a disturbing pattern. Projections suggest that by mid-century, parts of South Asia could become the first global regions to routinely experience temperatures exceeding the thresholds of human survivability. When we think of extreme heat, we usually picture places like North America's Death Valley, where the mercury can brush 49 degrees. But comparing an arid desert environment to the Indian subcontinent leads to a dangerous misunderstanding of the data. In a region dominated by coastal cities and dense monsoon weather patterns, a reading of 38 degrees can be significantly more deadly than 49 degrees in a desert. Looking strictly at the absolute temperature means we are measuring the danger using the wrong metric entirely. The human body relies on a very specific biological mechanism to avoid overheating. We sweat, and as that moisture evaporates from the skin, it pulls thermal energy away from our core. But the air can only hold so much water. In highly humid environments, like India's coasts or the active phases of the monsoon, the surrounding air is already saturated. The sweat stays on your skin, the evaporation process stalls, and your core temperature continues climbing. Meteorologists measure this combined threat using wet bulb temperature. It calculates how effectively the body cools itself when humidity is factored into ambient heat. For decades, physiological models suggested humans could safely endure up to 35 degrees Celsius. However, recent studies revised that limit downward. The body loses its ability to regulate internal heat at just 31 degrees. Once the local weather crosses that 31-degree threshold, prolonged outdoor labor becomes mathematically impossible to endure safely. The weather transforms into a biological trap. A joint United Nations report analyzing the Indo-Gangetic Plains outlines how these new physiological limits will severely penalize India's agricultural workforce. Under high-emission scenarios, the average growing season physical work capacity in the worst affected areas is projected to plummet. By the end of the century, expected labor output could drop below 40%. Because farming in India is heavily dependent on manual labor rather than mechanization, this direct reduction in safe working hours threatens the baseline viability of the nation's rice production. This chart shows the stark imbalance approaching South Asia. Rice currently provides 70% of the total caloric intake for over 1 billion people in the region, a massive caloric demand reliant on a rapidly shrinking window of survivable working conditions. Individual medical emergencies are only a fraction of the cost. The wet bulb threshold operates as a systemic threat, capable of dismantling the agricultural foundation and food security of the entire subcontinent. While the rural plains bake under natural sunlight, India's major metropolitan centers are actively engineering themselves into ovens. Satellite data tracking the urban heat island effect reveals the mechanics of this localized warming. In Bengaluru, extreme urban sprawl multiplied the city's built-up area tenfold over the last 5 decades. To accommodate that rapid growth, developers paved over 79% of the city's cooling water bodies. Consequently, Bengaluru recorded an alarming 15 degrees Celsius rise in average land surface temperatures across the exact same period. The data from Hyderabad presents a frustrating paradox. The city managed to triple its total green cover, yet it still experienced severe temperature spikes, leaving the air up to 2 degrees warmer at night compared to the rural outskirts. The underlying thermal data explains why. Uncoordinated, scattered tree planting cannot offset the massive thermal footprint of dense concrete and asphalt. The heavy infrastructure absorbs heat all day and aggressively radiates it back out after sunset. Unchecked urban expansion has effectively disabled the local environment's natural ability to cool down overnight, artificially extending the duration and intensity of the thermal stress. This model maps the subcontinent's crisis. It's a 3-pronged trap. Rising global temperatures intersect with lethal wet bulb humidity, magnified by urban sprawl. Projections show by century's end, nearly 70% of India's population will inhabit zones routinely hitting wet bulb temperatures of 32 degrees or higher. Retrofitting existing infrastructure to combat this is an immense logistical hurdle. Analysts warn that sprawling megacities like Chennai and Delhi may have already exhausted their thermal capacity to reverse the trend. Relying entirely on air conditioning is a failing adaptation strategy. It overloads power grids to the point of collapse and abandons millions of the most vulnerable citizens whose livelihoods require outdoor labor. The lethal heat of 2025 offers a brutal preview of the decades to come. Surviving it will demand a rigorous systemic redesign of both urban centers and agricultural practices, well before the weather itself becomes biologically incompatible with human life.